Right now, somewhere in the back of your mind, a program is running. You didn't write it, you didn't choose it. Someone else installed it in you a long time ago. A parent, a teacher, a disappointment you never fully recovered from. And every single day, quietly, in the background, it's deciding what you believe you're allowed to have. It decides how big your goals are allowed to sound before you flinch and shrink them back down. It decides whether you raise your hand for the opportunity or let someone else take it. Most people will live their entire lives and die without ever once suspecting that program exists. They'll call it just being realistic. They'll call it knowing my place. But you're not going to be one of them, not after the next 30 minutes. Because almost a century ago, there was a man who spent 20 years of his life studying the richest, most powerful people alive on this earth, men who built empires out of absolutely nothing. And he discovered something that most people, even today, refuse to believe. Success was never about luck. It was never about being born into the right family, or knowing the right people, or catching some mythical lucky break. It was a decision, made deliberately, made repeatedly, by people who understood something about the human mind that the rest of us were simply never taught in school, never taught at home, and are almost never taught anywhere at all unless we go looking for it ourselves. And by the end of this video, whether you're ready for it or not, you're going to understand it too. Maybe you already know that feeling. The one where you're doing everything right on paper, showing up on time, working hard, saying the right things in the meeting, being the reliable one, and yet nothing moves, nothing changes. Maybe you lie awake some nights running the numbers in your head, replaying the last 5 years, wondering why the people around you seem to just get lucky, get promoted, get chosen, while you keep grinding in the exact same place, wondering if you're the problem. Perhaps right now, you're carrying a goal you've never once said out loud to another human being because some old, tired voice in the back of your mind insists it's unrealistic, that people like you don't get to want things that big, that wanting it is embarrassing, almost childish, and you'd be better off just being grateful for what you already have and quietly letting the dream go the way you've let so many others go before it. Maybe you've started over more times than you'd like to count. New year, new plan, new burst of motivation at 2 in the morning after watching a video exactly like this one, and somewhere around week 3, it fades. The alarm gets snoozed, the plan gets adjusted, and the old you comes creeping back in through the side door, and you tell yourself quietly, maybe this is just who I am. Maybe some people are built for more, and I'm not one of them. Perhaps you've even started to suspect that wanting more is the actual problem, that you should just keep your head down, stop dreaming so loud, stop making other people uncomfortable with your ambition. And some nights, strangely, that thought feels almost like relief, because if you stop wanting it, it can't hurt anymore when it doesn't come. If you never really try, you never really have to find out whether you were capable all along. Maybe you scroll through the lives of people who seem to have figured it out, and you tell yourself it's fine, it's not a competition, and some part of you even believes that. But another part of you, a quieter and more honest part, feels something tighten in your chest anyway, and you close the app and sit there for a second in a silence that feels heavier than it should. Maybe you've gotten very good at being the supportive one, the encouraging one, cheering everyone else's wins, while your own list of unstarted things just keeps growing longer in a drawer somewhere you don't open very often. And maybe worst of all, you've started to build a whole identity around being realistic about it. You've got the explanations ready. The timing isn't right. The market's too competitive. You've got responsibilities other people don't have. All of it might even be partly true. But notice something for a second. Notice how comfortable those explanations have become, how quickly they arrive whenever the subject comes up, how well rehearsed they sound even to you. That's not analysis anymore. That's the program, defending itself. Here's what nobody ever told you, and I need you to actually hear this, not just let it wash past you. That voice isn't you. That voice is the program. It was installed by fear, by other people's limitations, by moments of rejection you were too young to process correctly. And a program that was installed can be rewritten, not overnight, not by accident, but deliberately, the same way it was written in the first place. Think about how quiet the installation was. Nobody sat you down and announced, here is the ceiling on your ambition, memorize it. It happened in smaller moments than that. A dream you mentioned once that got laughed off gently, a report card that decided what kind of student you were before you'd finished growing up, a comparison to a sibling or a classmate that lodged itself somewhere and never quite left. None of it was said with cruelty, most of the time. That's what makes it so hard to find later. It doesn't announce itself as a wound. It just quietly becomes how things are until you stop even noticing it's there, the way you stop noticing a hum in a room after you've lived in it long enough. And that's exactly why most self-help advice doesn't stick for most people. It tries to motivate the surface, the to-do list, the morning routine, the vision board on the wall, while the deeper program underneath keeps running the same old instructions, completely undisturbed. You can change your habits for a week on willpower alone. Anyone can. But willpower is expensive, and it runs out fast when it's fighting a program that's been quietly installed for 20 or 30 years. What actually changes a life isn't more willpower. It's a rewrite at the level where the program actually lives, and that rewrite starts with the decisions Hill spent his life studying. Let's start with the first decision, because everything else in this video depends on it, and if you skip this one, nothing else will hold. Most people wander through life with what feels like a direction, but is really just motion, busy, tired, endlessly reactive, never still enough to actually ask themselves where any of it is leading. Napoleon Hill called this the absence of definiteness of purpose. And out of everything he studied across 2 decades of research into successful men, he considered this single missing piece the most common reason brilliant, capable, hardworking people stayed average for their entire lives. Not stupidity, not laziness, just the absence of one clear, burning, specific target. Think about Andrew Carnegie, a boy who came from nothing, working in a Pittsburgh cotton mill for a few cents a day, in conditions that would horrify most of us today. There was no rational reason to believe this particular boy would ever be anything but poor. But somewhere very early, Carnegie fixed his mind on a single, almost absurdly specific outcome. He intended to build something enormous in the steel industry, and he intended to become one of the wealthiest men in the entire country doing it. Not, I'd like to do well someday if things work out. A fixed point on the horizon that never moved, no matter how far away it looked. Everything he did afterward, every job he took, every relationship he cultivated, every risk he chose to accept, bent toward that one target, like iron filings pulled toward a magnet. Most people believe successful people simply had more opportunities handed to them. But Hill found the pattern ran the opposite direction. Again and again, in case after case, the opportunities appeared after the decision was made, not before it. The clarity came first, the doors opened second. Nobody hands you the map before you've told the universe where you're actually trying to go. Ask yourself honestly right now, not later. Could you say in one clear sentence exactly what you're building toward this year? Not a mood, not a vague feeling of more. An actual sentence with a shape to it, with an ending you could recognize if you arrived at it. Most people can't answer that question cleanly, and it's not because they lack ambition. It's because nobody ever asked them to sit still long enough to find the answer. Here's your action step, and I want you to genuinely do this, not just nod along and keep scrolling. Tonight, before you sleep, write one single sentence, not a vague hope, not I want to be successful or I want a better life. A specific dated outcome, something like, by this exact date, I will have built this exact thing. Put a number on it. Put a deadline on it. Read it out loud to yourself before you close your eyes. That one sentence is the seed of every future version of you that hasn't been born yet, and it will not grow until you plant it. Now here's the second decision, and this is where most people quietly disqualify themselves from the life they claim to want without ever realizing they're doing it, the decision to actually decide. Hill studied hundreds of people who never managed to build meaningful wealth or achievement, and he found something that surprised even him. It wasn't a lack of good ideas. Everyone has good ideas. It wasn't a lack of raw intelligence either. It was chronic, habitual indecision, an inability to commit to a direction and hold it steady, even when the direction wasn't perfect, even when the outcome wasn't guaranteed. Henry Ford understood this better than almost anyone alive in his era. When he decided to build an affordable automobile for ordinary working people, not the wealthy elite, but regular families, every engineer and advisor around him insisted it couldn't be done at the price point he was demanding. He didn't have the technology figured out yet. He didn't have the manufacturing process solved. The parts, the assembly, the cost structure, none of it existed yet in any usable form. But he made the decision first and let the how catch up to the decision afterward, instead of waiting for certainty before he ever committed to anything. That's the part people get backwards over and over. They think confidence has to arrive before the decision gets made. It doesn't work that way, and it never did. Confidence is built by the decision, not the other way around. The mind doesn't wait for proof, it waits for a decision. Ford held to that decision through failures that would have quietly ended most men's careers before they ever got started, and he eventually built the assembly line manufacturing process that changed industry forever, putting an entire nation on wheels. What's easy to forget, looking back at it now with the benefit of hindsight, is how reckless that decision looked to everyone standing next to him at the time. Nobody around him could see the assembly line before it existed. They could only see a man insisting on something that, by every expert opinion available, wasn't yet possible. That's usually what a real decision looks like from the outside, right up until the moment it isn't reckless anymore. It's history. Compare that to how most of us actually operate day to day. We ask for more opinions. We wait for one more sign. We tell ourselves we're being thorough, when really we're just postponing the moment we'd have to be accountable for a choice that might not work out. Hill noticed this exact pattern in the people who never built anything substantial, an endless, exhausting search for certainty that was never going to arrive, because certainty doesn't exist on the front end of anything worth doing. It only exists in hindsight, after the decision has already been made and lived with. Most people believe decisive people are simply less afraid than everyone else, but Hill proved something very different when he studied them closely. Decisive people feel the exact same fear as anyone else. They just refuse to let indecision become their default resting state. They decide fast, and they decide often, and they treat a wrong decision as vastly more useful than no decision at all, because a wrong decision can be corrected, adjusted, learned from, while indecision just sits there quietly rotting, taking a little more from you every single week you leave it unresolved. Your action step here is simple and a little uncomfortable if you're honest with yourself. Find one decision you've been circling for weeks, maybe even months, without ever landing on an answer. Today, not next Monday, today, give yourself 24 hours to decide it, one way or the other. Not research it more, not think about it a little longer. Decide it. You are not behind where you should be. You are unfinished, and unfinished things get finished by decisions, never by waiting patiently for information that was never actually going to arrive. Now let's talk about faith, because this is the principle people misunderstand more than any other on this list, and it has almost nothing to do with religion in the way Hill used the word. Hill used faith to describe something closer to an operating belief, a conviction held so deeply, so consistently, that your subconscious mind eventually starts treating it as settled fact and quietly begins rearranging your daily behavior, your instincts, even the way you carry yourself to match it. John D. Rockefeller grew up in genuine instability, a father who was frequently absent and financially unreliable, a household where money was never something anyone could count on from one season to the next. By almost any reasonable measure, Rockefeller had every excuse available to develop a permanent scarcity mindset and play everything cautious and small for the rest of his life. Instead, from a remarkably young age, he held an almost stubborn internal conviction that he was going to control vast wealth someday. Not hope for it, not wish for it wistfully on occasion. Believe it, the way you believe the sun is going to rise tomorrow morning without needing proof. That belief quietly shaped decision after decision, year after year, and eventually helped build one of the largest fortunes in American history. Most people believe that kind of unshakable confidence has to be earned through results first, before you're allowed to feel it. But Hill found the sequence ran the other way in the people who actually built something that lasted. The belief came first. The results were simply the belief slowly working itself out in the physical world over time, the way a seed works itself out into a tree. And here's a myth worth busting directly, because I want to be honest with you instead of just motivational. Faith like this isn't about pretending everything is fine when it clearly isn't. It's not toxic positivity dressed up in nicer language. It's a deliberate decision to feed your own mind evidence of what you want, again and again, until your subconscious simply stops arguing with you about whether it's possible. Hill called the tool for doing this autosuggestion, essentially, the disciplined practice of consciously feeding yourself the belief you want to hold out loud, with real emotion behind it, until it settles down into the part of your mind that runs quietly on autopilot, shaping your choices before you're even consciously aware you're choosing. And notice something important about Rockefeller's story that's easy to skip past. His belief wasn't loud. He wasn't the kind of man giving speeches about his own destiny at dinner parties. It lived quietly, underneath the surface, shaping thousands of small choices that nobody else was even watching him make. That's usually what real faith looks like in a life, not a dramatic public declaration, but a private, stubborn certainty that keeps showing up in the small decisions long after anyone else has stopped paying attention. Your action step: choose one belief about your own future that you genuinely want to be true, and speak it out loud, in the present tense, morning and night, for the next 7 days in a row. Not as a wish, as a fact you're actively informing your own mind of. Something like, yeah, I am the kind of person who finishes what they start. Say it until it stops feeling strange or performative. That strangeness fading away is the sound of the old program quietly being overwritten by a new one. Let's move into imagination now, because this is the principle that separates people who merely work hard from people who actually build something new. Hill drew a distinction between what he called synthetic imagination, rearranging old ideas into new combinations, and creative imagination, the rarer ability to sense possibilities that don't exist yet in the world at all. Most valuable achievements throughout history came from the first kind, not the second, which should be a relief to you, because it means you don't need to be a mystical genius. You just need to practice combining what already exists in ways nobody has bothered to combine yet. Thomas Edison didn't invent electricity. Electricity already existed, well understood by scientists before he ever touched it. What Edison actually did was imagine a specific practical combination: a filament, a vacuum, a circuit, arranged in a way nobody had successfully arranged before, to produce something ordinary households could actually use safely in their homes. That's imagination doing its real work, not conjuring something from nothing, but seeing a new arrangement of things that already exist all around everyone, hiding in plain sight. Most people believe imagination is a fixed trait. You either have it or you don't, like eye color. But Hill found the opposite. Imagination behaves like a muscle. It weakens through disuse, and it strengthens through deliberate, repeated exercise. Most of us stopped exercising that muscle somewhere around the time school started grading us on having one correct answer instead of many possible ones. We got rewarded for speed and certainty, and quietly punished in small social ways for the wrong guess, the weird idea, the answer nobody else in the room had considered. Over enough years, most people simply stop generating options at all. They wait for the obvious answer to appear, and when it doesn't, they conclude the problem is unsolvable, when really they just stopped 1 or 2 rounds short of where the good answer was actually hiding. Your action step: take one ordinary problem in your life or your work this week, and spend 10 uninterrupted minutes forcing yourself to generate 10 different possible solutions, even the ones that seem obviously bad at first glance. Don't judge them while they're coming. Just generate volume. Somewhere around solution number 7 or 8, something genuinely useful tends to surface, because you finally exhausted the obvious answers, and your mind is forced to reach further than it normally allows itself to. Now, the principle that ties every other one together, the one Hill considered almost more important than raw talent itself: persistence. Because here's a truth nobody wants printed on a motivational poster and hung on a wall: you are going to fail, probably multiple times, possibly many, many times. The people who eventually win are not the people who somehow avoided failure altogether. They're the people who treated every failure as tuition instead of as a final verdict on who they are. Edison belongs here too, because the story is almost unbelievable, and it happens to be true. He ran through thousands of failed attempts before he ever landed on a working design for the incandescent light bulb. When a reporter once asked him how it felt to fail so many times in a row, his answer wasn't defensive, and it wasn't defeated. He simply refused to accept the framing that those attempts were failures at all. In his mind, each one eliminated a wrong path and narrowed the search a little closer toward the right one. That's not just a charming personality quirk you read in a biography. That's a mental discipline. And disciplines, unlike talents, can be learned by absolutely anyone willing to practice them. Most people believe persistence is mostly about raw willpower, gritting your teeth and forcing yourself through pain by sheer stubbornness. But Hill found something more interesting when he actually studied the pattern closely. The people who persisted the longest weren't necessarily the toughest people in the room. They were the ones whose purpose was specific enough and whose desire was hot enough that quitting simply stopped feeling like a real option worth seriously considering. Persistence isn't a fixed personality trait you either have or don't have. It's a byproduct of a purpose clear enough to survive direct contact with failure without shattering. There's something else worth noticing in the way Edison talked about those thousands of attempts. He never described them as a burden he was enduring on the way to the real prize. He described the process itself with something close to fascination, the way a scientist talks about an experiment rather than the way a martyr talks about suffering. That distinction matters more than it sounds like it should. The people who quit early usually experience failure as evidence against them personally. The people who persist experience the exact same failure as evidence about the method, not about their own worth. Same event, completely different program running underneath it. Your action step: think of the thing you quit on most recently, not to punish yourself with it again, to extract the data buried inside it. What did that attempt actually teach you that you didn't know before you started it? Write the answer down in one sentence. That failure just became fuel if you're willing to let it. Somewhere right now, someone with less talent than you, less experience than you, fewer advantages than you, is already ahead of where you want to be, simply because they decided first and refused to stop after the first no they heard. There's a moment here I have to be honest with you about, because this video would be hollow if I pretended I was just narrating history from some safe, comfortable distance, untouched by any of it myself. I've had the nights where the plan didn't work. I've had the version of myself that watched videos exactly like this one, nodded along, felt something stir, and went right back to the same comfortable, half-committed life the very next morning. Because change is easy to understand intellectually and brutally hard to actually sustain day after day. I've made the vague goals that sounded good but meant nothing. I've waited for certainty before deciding and watched the window quietly close while I was still waiting. I've let indecision eat months of my life while I called it being careful or staying realistic, because those words felt safer to say out loud than I'm afraid. So if any part of you feels a little exposed right now, a little too closely seen, good. That discomfort is the old program finally loosening its grip on you. It only feels this uncomfortable right before something in you actually starts to shift for real. I'm not telling you this because I found some perfect formula, and now I'm standing on the other side of it looking back down at you from somewhere higher up. I'm telling you this because the difference between the years I stayed stuck and the years I actually moved wasn't talent, and it wasn't circumstance, and it definitely wasn't luck. It was 5 decisions, made badly and imperfectly at first, made again the next day a little less badly, made again after that until they weren't decisions anymore. They were just who I'd quietly become. That's the part nobody tells you going in. It doesn't feel dramatic while it's happening. It just feels like one slightly harder Tuesday after another until one day you look back and the person from a year ago feels like someone you used to know. Here's what I need you to understand before this video ends, because it's the entire point of everything you just heard. None of these principles work as information sitting quietly in your head. They only work as action, taken in the physical world today. You could listen to this video 10 times over, nod along every single time, and change absolutely nothing. And the old program just keeps running exactly as it always has, undisturbed. Or you could take one of these 5 steps tonight, write the one sentence, make the one decision, speak the one belief, generate the 10 solutions, extract the one lesson from the one failure, and something in the actual architecture of your mind quietly, permanently shifts. Not because the idea itself was new to you, because you finally did something with it instead of just admiring it. Whatever the mind can conceive and believe, it genuinely can achieve. But conceiving isn't idle daydreaming, and believing isn't casual hoping. They're disciplines. They're built the exact same way physical muscle is built, through repeated, deliberate, sometimes genuinely uncomfortable repetition, starting long before any results ever show up on the outside for other people to see and admire. You don't need permission for any of this. You don't need a better year, a cleaner slate, or a more convenient starting line than the one you're standing on right now, tonight, exactly as you are. The men in this video didn't wait for ideal conditions, because ideal conditions are a myth that keeps otherwise capable people waiting indefinitely for a day that never actually arrives on its own. They started from wherever they happened to be standing, with whatever they happened to have in their hands, and they let the decision do the heavy lifting that circumstance never was going to do for them. And if you're waiting for a sign that you're allowed to start, here it is. Nobody is coming to grant you permission. Nobody handed Carnegie a certificate before he built his fortune. Nobody approved Ford's plan before he broke ground on it. The permission you've been waiting for was never going to arrive from outside you, because it was never anyone else's to give in the first place. It was always sitting quietly inside the same decision you've been circling for weeks. So here's your challenge for the next 24 hours, and I want you to actually accept it instead of just agreeing with it in your head. Pick just one principle from tonight: purpose, decision, faith, imagination, or persistence, and take the exact action step tied to it before you go to sleep tomorrow night. Not all 5 at once, just one. Small, specific, actually completed. That's how the program gets rewritten. Not through one dramatic, cinematic overhaul that happens overnight, but through one deliberate decision that proves to your own mind undeniably that you're someone who follows through now. And before you go, I want exactly one word from you in the comments below. Just one single word that represents the thing you're committing to tonight. Purpose, decision, faith, imagination, persistence, or whatever word fits what's stirring in you right now. Not a paragraph explaining yourself, one word. Because the moment you type it and hit send, you've made it real, and you've made it public to yourself in a way that's much harder to quietly walk away from tomorrow morning. You are not behind. You are unfinished. And unfinished is the most powerful place a person can possibly stand, because everything from this exact moment forward is still yours to decide.